Today, we're in Frisco, Texas, at a very unique museum that sits within the Frisco Discovery Center. Now, see, as a kid, I loved video games, and this place is all about the history of video games. You see, we're at the National Videogame Museum. The National Videogame Museum was made in 2016. Over 10,000 square feet of museum dedicated to video games and the video game industry. Now, there's a lot of interactive exhibits in there, so we're gonna meet up with founder John Hardy to hear more about it. So let's go find him. Everybody, we are here with founder John Hardy of the National Video Game Museum. First of all, thanks for having us out here today.
My pleasure, sure.
This place is incredible.
A lot of fun.
I mean, as a kid, I loved playing video games. And so as I look around, I see all these different video games and video games from, history that I've never seen before. And so this is like a kid's wonderland for me. So thank you very much for having us out here.
Glad to have you, thanks.
First of all, I have to ask, very important question, John. Frisco, Texas. Why is the National Video Game Museum here in Frisco? I mean, Silicon Valley is the global technology capital of the world. That's where you would think it would be, but here we are, Frisco.
It's kind of an interesting story. We originally envisioned the museum being in Sunnyvale, San Jose, California, right? Silicon Valley area. When we first approached the different Chamber of Commerce and different people like that out there, we got absolutely no response. I mean, not even a reply to say, we're not interested. They just didn't even respond.
They're like, we already have way too much technology here. We don't need a video game museum.
They didn't even want to know about us. So, I mean, it was literally, we say crickets. It was nothing, right? But we had been doing these traveling exhibits and these shows, like at Game Developer Conference and E3, all the big trade shows.
And in Las Vegas, you and your other founding partners actually had your video game expo that was there as well.
We had our own convention called Classic Gaming Expo that we ran for 12, 13 years, So we had kind of changed into doing these trade shows and getting involved in the industry. And it was at one of those shows, a high-level show called DICE, which is in Las Vegas, that we met a gentleman named Randy Pitchford. Now, Randy, if you know, is the head of Gearbox Software, and they make Borderlands and all these big titles, right? And he saw us, he saw what we were doing, and he said, hey, my office is in Plano, but we're moving to Frisco. We're building a new building in Frisco Square. Let's pitch the idea. Maybe we could do something. And he followed through on that, and it morphed. That's how we ended up in Frisco.
And lo and behold,
what we proposed. And they took a gamble, and they renovated the space for us, put additional parking, and they invested in.
That's incredible. And the museum actually sits within the Frisco Discovery Center. So there's other things that are here, not just the Video Game Museum.
We have an art gallery,
that partnership in here.
Science and Technology Museum. We have a train exhibit. There's several partners in here that are all doing different things, but it's become a cultural district, and it's really, really growing fast.
It's a destination where you want to come. And like I said, for me, video games is my life as a kid, so this is the destination I want to come to. Well, so with all these different interactive places, I think what we should do is probably start at the beginning and then work our way from there. So let's head to the very starting point of the National Video Game Museum.
You got it.
All right, John, so we're starting at the beginning.
Stage one, right?
The very start of video games. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of video games?
Sure. So one of the things we have here is a replica of the original brown box. This was actually made by Ralph Baer. There's only a handful of these out there. The original is in the Smithsonian. You can see it's just very simplistic Pong. There's switches on the front. You have the two paddles, and that's all it can do, right? It doesn't have any memory to take cartridges and play other games.
And it only played that one game.
Right, with different variations, you can change the size of the paddle and the speed and all this other stuff. But yeah, so it was really simplistic. And the story is that this was licensed to Magnavox, and they came out with the original Magnavox Odyssey, which we actually have up on the wall behind me here. They made it into a consumer product and marketed it that way. So a lot of good history as far as the original piece that was demoed, before Magnavox took over with distribution. Cool story with Pong is that Nolan Bushnell, who's the father of Atari, saw this on display and decided we can do Pong in the arcade, and they made the giant arcade Pong.
So from this, it evolved from this into what you saw with Pong in the arcade.
Sure.
And then it all actually evolved from this up to all these different kind of consoles as well that you see up here.
Right. And Pong was a huge success at the time. It was a very simple to make a Pong. It was a General Instruments chip, and you would just tie the outputs to your paddles and controllers. And each generation of the chip got a little more advanced.
Such an incredible game. I mean, I remember playing it when I was a kid, and I used to always think, that it's a great game, but that's for grandma and grandpa. But I think what you need to invest in here at the National Videogame Museum is like a really big Pong game, like a giant Pong game.
Super Pong?
Super Pong. I mean, come on. Texas, everything's bigger in Texas. So I think if you would... Is that the world's largest Pong game?
It is.
Okay. Do you feel like a game of Pong, John?
I'm a little rusty, but let's give it a shot.
All right, let's try this out.
All right.
All right, John, so it looks as though we are now inside of a video game retail store, but this is just one of the exhibits that you were talking about.
Sure, right. It was one of the interactives we wanted to make where we recreated, because what happened is these mom and pop stores were like really big at the time of the crash, right? They were, a little more personal nature than going into a big store like Walmart or a Toys R Us. They were just family-run businesses.
Kind of like a comic book store where kids go in and get the comic books and they come back for the latest edition. Same kind of thing with the video game stores. You'd come in and you'd find the video game you were looking for, the new console you're looking for. Nintendo has just now created a new glove controller, and so you want to come in and grab that.
Absolutely. And, these stores, you got to know the people. Unfortunately, they all pretty much went by the wayside with the crash. They didn't have the buying power of the big chains. And when the time came that all this bad software that we probably will talk about was being returned, the big chains could say, hey, we're not buying any more games unless you give us credit. These mom and pop outfits didn't have that ability to do that, and they took a lot of losses, and most of them shut down.
And with you talking about the crash, so the crash you're talking about is the epic video game crash of 1983. Now, a common myth that is out there, which I think you're going to debunk right now, is that this video game, the E.T. video game by Atari, was the main cause of the crash. Now, a little bit about that. It was a video game that was created in 5.5 months. Right? Weeks? Not months, weeks?
No, weeks.
They had to create this in weeks?
People realize you and I could say, hey, we're going to make a game, right? Because there's millions of consoles, and all we have to do is sell a small amount, and we'll be pretty good financially, right? The problem is we didn't know how to make a game properly, so we put out something that was really not fun. People were returning this type of software. Now you see we have a clearance bin over there. A lot of those games ended up in the clearance bin, and there was this glut of bad software. So as a parent, and you come back with your $40 purchase, and your kid plays it for 5 minutes and says, what is this, right? Now you're really annoyed. So the clearance bins, what happened is parents would go and they'd buy 4 games for that same amount of money. But those were probably worse games, in general, than the top stuff. Then you also had Atari, which was the big player at the time. Their internal stuff, stuff like E.T. and their Pac-Man that were rushed to market to make scheduling, deadlines for Christmas and things like that. Those were just rushed and they weren't good. So now, they're losing confidence. The people are losing confidence in the industry already because of the bad software. Now the big names like Atari are putting out bad software. So after a while, it just imploded. I was
going to say, it just all piled up and got to the point where it couldn't sustain itself anymore.
It was too much. And there was too much being made and hitting the market, flooding the market. And that's why, even though E.T. gets universal blame, don't get me wrong, it's a rough game, man.
As we all know, when you're playing video games, you want to be sucked in. You want to be invested in that storyline, in that world. And if it's rushed and it's not that captivating, you're just going to put it away. You're not going to play it. One time play, then put it away and you're done.
The gameplay is the most important thing. If you have fun gameplay, then the rest doesn't really matter. The graphics could be a little rough looking, but if it's engaging and it's fun to play, you're still going to sell. You're still going to have a good title. But unfortunately, a lot of them weren't, you know?
Loving this. Well, thank you so much for showing this, and especially for debunking the myth that E.T. was the sole cause of the great crash of 1983.
Definitely not, yeah. There was many other culprits. So.
Okay, well, John, we're going to look around a little bit more, but I do realize that you said that you had a game paused, and you got to get back to it because you are a gamer.
Right?
So we'll catch up with you later. But thank you very much for showing us around, and I think I'm just going to go walk around and enjoy this place and all the things that you have to offer.
Please do, yeah. Enjoy it.
We've now reached stage 7 of the interactive exhibits, which is the rise of the computers. Now, you might not realize this, but in the old days, you'd actually play the games on computers. Now, we started with Atari and other kind of console systems where you'd plug in your joysticks and controllers, but the way to play the games is using a floppy disk. Okay, now you might not know what a floppy disk is, but I bet Mom and Dad and Grandma and Grandpa do. This is kind of like a CD that you have nowadays that you put all your information on, but you take the floppy disk, you put it into a computer, or more importantly, you'd share the floppy disk with your friends who had a lot of games on their computer. They'd put those games on the floppy disk, and then you'd have all those games right here, 20, 30 games on that floppy disk. But this is really cool because this was a way to actually have a home computer in your house where Mom and Dad could use it for anything they needed, but then you could also play your video games on this as well. Now, this was around during the 1983 crash that we heard about a little earlier, but the reality is that this was a great way to keep your games going without having to actually have the cartridges or the consoles that you see nowadays. But when the crash happened, something had to resurge the console industry, and that was the Nintendo NES. That's right, when the Nintendo system came out in 1985, guess what? That brought along Duck Hunt. It brought along Super Mario Brothers. All those games came around, so let's go check that stuff out. All right, now here's a treasure that I found as I was walking around the museum. This is Dragon's Lair. Now, as a kid, I used to play this game all the time when I'd see it in the arcade, because guess what? This was one of the first storyline-driven video games. Now, it was created by Don Bluth, who's an animator from Disney and a lot of other animated movies that you see out there from the 1980s. But in 1983, he created this game, which it's state-of-the-art. It was the first game that was on Laserdisc. So you didn't have a cartridge that you put into a console. You actually had a laser disc that you play it on. And then from that laser disc, it became an arcade game, and then other brands picked it up, like Nintendo and Sony and all those. But the cool thing about this is this video game is story-driven, so it's a cartoon that you play. You go through the storyline trying to save the damsel in distress. But here's another really cool thing. In the arcades, video games up to that point were only 25 cents. This game was the first game that actually took 50 cents to play it. So you had to pay a little extra for this great adventure. But it's so much fun because, like I said, you're playing an animated cartoon like what you'd watch on Saturday mornings right there in the arcade. You know, in fact, I think I want to kind of play it right now. I got my token. Let's see what I can do. Another part of the National Videogame Museum is the Sanctuary. Now, this room right here is an exact replica of a mid-1980s bedroom. I mean, you got the posters, you got the games, you got the really cool Pac-Man bed sheets. Now, see, this area right here reminds me of my youth when I was a kid, because when I was mid-90s, I was a 9-year-old loving video games, especially my new Nintendo that came out in 1985. I could play Super Mario Brothers. You could play Duck Hunt right there in your bedroom on your very own TV. But inside this room, if you take a few steps over, you enter the living room of the 1980s. Now, this looks just like my grandparents' house with the couch and the wood TV and all the artwork on the walls. This brings back my youth because we'd play video games at their house in their living room. And so when your mom and dad and grandparents come with you to the museum and they see these areas, it's gonna bring back the times that they were kids playing video games back in the 1980s too. And check it out, there's even a video game right here. As we started with John, we were talking about the interactive exhibit areas inside the museum. Now, they're called stages. Well, we're at this one right now, which is a console display area, but it's interactive, which means you can actually play the video games. Now, there's consoles here that start from 1986, ranging all the way up to 2001, so you can really try out the different kind of consoles over the years. You can play Nintendo, Xbox, you can play Genesis, you can play Atari, and really see what these games were like back then and even to today. As you walk around the exhibit, you're gonna find the different stages. Now, this is stage number 2. You wanna follow those stages because those lead you through the museum. Now, stage 2 is the timeline of consoles. And if you look around on this wall, you can see the evolution of consoles from way back when to present day. Now, if you use these gigantic controllers here in front of the screens, you can go ahead and select certain consoles to find out all the information and details about that console. Now, if you have time, go ahead and scroll through the different kinds and see all the details that you'll find. Okay, fun fact number 1 of the episode today. Do you know what the number 1 selling console of all time is? With over 155 million units sold, it's the PlayStation 2. We've now reached stage 4 inside the exhibits, and this is all about the controllers. Now, if you look behind me, you can see the evolution of controllers through the years. As John was talking about earlier, when you had Pong, there was only 1 or 2 main controls on the controller to play the game. But as you move down the list, you can see as the years progressed, more buttons were added, which then gave you more control and more movement of the characters. As you get down here, you get down to the Xbox, you get down to Sega Genesis, and even the Nintendo controller, where you had multiple buttons, which also gave you multiple ways to make your character move and win. Now, here's a little tidbit you might not know. I know this from experience because I used them all the time. There were cheat codes when you play the games. So if you push the right sequence of numbers and buttons, what would happen is that you would get an extra limited amount of power, or you'd gain a new character, or you'd gain a new entryway into the game that you were moving through. So many different cheat codes were out there. And when you come here to the Video Game Museum, you'll learn more about those cheat codes and how they played a part in video game history. But again, if you look at this, look at all these different controllers. I mean, this is the controller from your mom and dad's youth and maybe even your grandparents' youth. And you're like, that's way too easy. Well, that's why there's all these controllers down here, which you're probably a lot more accustomed to. The virtual reality exhibit here showcases one aspect of video gaming that's a little different than the rest that you've seen here. Now, virtual reality started in 1985. That's where it was coined, the phrase virtual reality, which made the experience of video gaming completely different. It took you into the world of a video game. Now, as you see here, there's different aspects of the evolution of virtual reality. Now, for me, when I was a kid, it was the Power Glove by Nintendo, where you'd put the glove on and you had the controller on the arm, but it also had sensors in the fingers so that it took you further into the game. Now, the main thing you have to realize is that all these virtual realities here, they pretty much failed in their evolution, but they led to virtual reality that you see nowadays. When you go out and you play those games where you put on the suits and you're in the world of the video game, it all started right here. But again, just another aspect of video gaming that you'll find here inside the museum. All right, we've now reached the checkpoint inside the National Videogame Museum, so I thought, since we're at the checkpoint, why not have some fun video game facts? Now, first of all, what is the #1 video game out there in the world? Do you know what it is? I think you might. It's a game I see played all the time at the hospital. It's Minecraft. That's right, over 200 million copies sold. That's incredible. Okay, the next one. Here's another fun fact. What is the #1 video game company in the world? Do you know? It's Sony. However, the most popular video game company in the world, it's not Sony, it's Epic Sports. That's right. And here's one other fact that I think some of you might know. See, when I was a kid, I loved playing video games, but my parents always told me, you know, Kelly, you can have fun playing it, but it's not gonna give you a career. You're not gonna make any money playing video games. Well, you know what? Now, there's professional gamers that make a whole lot of money. They make their living playing video games. And the #1 professional gamer in the world is Tyler Ninja Bevins. That's right, he makes over $15 million a year playing video games. He's got his YouTube channel. He was also on The Masked Singer. He was the big ice cream cone that was singing. Really cool to see that a hobby as a kid playing video games might actually lead to a career. So there's a few fun facts for you, but you know what? There's a lot more to explore here, so let me go check out another exhibit. We've reached the final stage here at the National Video Game Museum. It's the Pixel Dreams Arcade. That's right, it's a replica of the 1980s arcades that your parents used to play in when they were kids. Now, the cool thing is that when you come here, remember, it's interactive, so if you have a token, you can play these games too. See, when I was a kid, you used to use a quarter, and that quarter you'd put onto the console, which would say that that's my game to play. Well, folks, I hope you had a great time here today. A big thanks to John Hardy for showing us around. Now, you know what? I'm not sure about you, but I've got some video games to play, so I'll see you next time. This is Cully, and I'll see you around town.